Good afternoon, and welcome to our launch of Following the Money, Transparency and Oversight in the Government Budget Process in Jamaica. My name is Yentel Williams, and I am Director of Strategy at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute. CAPRI is an independent think tank devoted to providing evidence-based research with the aim of improving public policy making in Jamaica and across the Caribbean. Today, we are excited to launch our latest report, which assesses transparency, public participation, and oversight of the budget preparation in Jamaica. This report contributes to an important ongoing debate about public access to budget information and public participation in the budget process. This assessment is relatively new in the Jamaican context. The Open Budget Survey, the world's only independent, comparative, and objective research instrument, was first conducted by the Government of Jamaica in 2019. Given this reality, it is significant to share the findings of why Jamaica, alongside over 100 other countries surveyed, was considered to have failed to reach the minimum threshold for adequate budget transparency, public participation, and oversight. We encourage the members of our virtual audience to participate in the discussion by submitting their questions online using Slido. To do so, visit slido.com and enter the event code CAPRI, after which you will have the option to post or upvote questions that you deem critical for our panelists to respond to. I now welcome Alexander Cisonello, our partner from International Budget Partnership, to deliver some remarks.
Hello everyone, my name is Alex Ciconello and I'm a Senior Program Officer at the International Budget Partnership, IBP, an international organization that collaborates with civil society around the world to analyze and influence public budgets in order to reduce poverty and promote equity. During today's event, we are excited to share with you all the results of the most recent Open Budget Survey, or OBS, which was released in May of this year, and explore opportunities for improving open budget practice in Jamaica in the future. First of all, what is Open Budget Survey? The OBS is a tool for governments, civil society, and development partners to identify, discuss, and prioritize actions that can advance open and accountable budgets. The survey is the only comparable and independent measure of open budgeting in the world, with three pillars. The first pillar is budget transparency, the second is participation, and the third pillar is oversight. The assessment is conducted every 2 years, with this edition of the OBS based on government practice that took place up until the end of 2020. This round, the survey covers 120 countries. I want to share some information on the methodology of the survey. The OBS uses a questionnaire of 145 scored indicators based on international good practice and standards. These indicators measure the public availability and the comprehensiveness of 8 key budget documents, the role and effectiveness of formal oversight institutions, the Supreme institutions and also the Parliament, and opportunities for public participation in the budget process. We undertake a rigorous research process that is led by local civil society researcher and subject to peer review. In Jamaica, IBP has a strong partnership with CAPRI, who led the research on OBS 2021. We also invite national governments to comment on the draft results. Importantly, the survey is more than a research instrument. It is a tool for civic engagement and an exercise of citizenship. It documents progress made in open budgeting practice and provides a roadmap where countries can improve. Alongside CAPRI and JAMP, over the past 3 years, We have also worked with several local Jamaican civil society organizations from a diversity of sectors, include disability rights, vulnerable communities, women's rights, LGBT, youth, and anti-corruption, to connect their work, the work of those organizations, with central government budget process through a project we call COAB, that is the acronym for Collaborating for Open and Accountable Budgets. It has been a real pleasure to learn more about the amazing work going on in the ground in Jamaica, and we look forward to continue to partner with CAPRI and others in Jamaica to conduct budget analysis, developing advocacy agendas aimed at influencing priority budget policies and process, and also build and strengthen relationships with key accountability stakeholders, particularly the Auditor General Department, members of the Parliament, and the Ministry of Finance and Public Service. Thank you, and looking forward to today's discussion.
All right, thank you, and welcome everyone. We have a fascinating discussion this evening talking about why openness in fiscal budgeting is important, transparency, oversight of the budget process, and public participation. I thank Alex and Yentel for bringing us into this discussion. Before we get to a discussion with our panelists, Simon Johnson is with us and Shanake Chisholm is with us. We're going to have a brief presentation of the findings of our open budget survey in Jamaica. Shanake is going to give us that report.
Thank you, Dr. King. The government is a steward of your money. You therefore have a right to say how it is to be spent, as well as to see how it has been spent. That is what this is about. Does your government provide channels to listen to you and to show you what they have done with your money? According to the IBP, having an open budget process means establishing meaningful and inclusive spaces to engage the public in the budget process. The three categories assessed openness are transparency, participation, and oversight. The Open Budget Survey is an assessment of how well the Government of Jamaica facilitates public access to budget information, how many formal opportunities are available to the public to participate in budget processes, and the role or oversight institutions play. This survey is not an opinion poll, nor is it a measure of perception. Rather, it is based on a rigorous objective methodology subject to independent peer review. It consists of 228 questions that remains the same for each of the 120 countries that participated, of which 145 questions are scored. The score questions assesses whether the budget is available to the public in a useful time frame, if there are formal and meaningful opportunities for the public to engage, including the most disadvantaged, and also it examines whether or not the legislator, audit office, and independent fiscal institution are in place and is enabled to function properly. In 2019, Jamaica participated in its first open budget survey, which highlighted the fact that the government had quite a bit of work to get done to meet the global average. Fast forward into 2021, Jamaica participated in our second round of the survey. The truth is, the government had quite a task on their hands, as they had to make budgetary shifts to accommodate the COVID pandemic whilst maintaining their transparency, oversight, and participation mechanisms. Let's explore how the government did in all three categories. To start, transparency. In assessing transparency, we looked at 8 key budget documents. We assessed their timeliness, online availability, and comprehensiveness of these documents. Only 7 of the 8 documents were timely and could be accessed online. As it relates to comprehensiveness, only 2 of the 7 documents were fully comprehensive. Overall, the score for transparency has improved to 60, which is above the global average. And as we continue to improve, we should aim towards the OECD average of 61. But what can we do to improve that? Let's look at our roadmap to score 61. The only document that was not produced was the pre-budget statement. So we should produce a document that meets the minimum requirements of the pre-budget statement and publish it online in a timely manner. We could improve the comprehensiveness of the year-end report, also called the Central Government's Operation Table, by including actual outcome for expenditures, comparison between the original macroeconomic forecast and the actual outcome, and the differences between the enacted level of funds for policies that are intended to benefit countries' most impoverished population and their actual outcome. We could also improve the comprehensiveness of the enacted budget, also called the Appropriations Act, for instance, by providing expenditure estimates by program and the revenues by category or individual sources. So that's the blueprint, or better yet, the road to tread to achieve adequate budgetary transparency. The next category is public participation. It is said that public participation is the bridge between true democracy and good governance. Having mechanisms in place to accommodate public participation creates a sense of commitment for citizens towards budget, and it ensures that the government is working for the people. In addition to the intrinsic democratic value, participation is an instrumental driver for socio-economic change and a fundamental way to empower citizens. In Jamaica, at the legislative level, citizens are allowed to attend the budgetary hearings in Parliament. However, they are not allowed to share their inputs at any point in the hearing. This should not be the case. You see, public engagement creates mutual benefits. Citizens become better educated about public policies and government activities, and when they tap into the expertise of government officials, we can then build a more effective and responsive government. And that's exactly what we want to do. Let's look at a few examples over the world that offers good opportunities for public participation. First, we have South Korea. Public participation is achieved using an advisory committee that is involved at every stage of the top-down budget cycle, which is we set a total spending, then establish an expenditure ceiling for each ministry or sector, and then the fiscal resources are allocated by government department to each project below that ceiling. The advisory committee consists of both civil society organization staff and outside experts. Members of the committee have direct influence over the budget progress and participate in both self-assessment, meta-evaluation, and the power of vet and veto, which provides significant power to the committee both at the line ministry and the central budget agency level. Now, let's travel down to New Zealand. The New Zealand government recently asked for public's input during the development of their first well-being budget and provided feedback to the public on how their views were used to inform various tools. Online polls were designed as a time-effective way to gather public's input. Postcards were distributed in community facilities and regional offices as an alternative to online submissions. Pre-budget hearings are held by the New Zealand Parliament, which request written submission and oral testimony from members of the public. The lesson that can be learned from both countries is that there is a space for citizens' participation, both at the local level and the national level. Jamaica has an investment map platform, which is a mechanism for citizens' participation. This platform provides a way to collect the information and the level of satisfaction citizens experience in regards to the execution of projects. We have the ability to like, leave comments, and upload photos for any particular project. In analyzing the Supreme Audit's extent for opportunities for public participation in the budget, we see that the structure in place is sufficient. The Auditor General allows the public to submit information highlighting allegations of fraud, non-compliance with the Government of Jamaica's policy, procedures and legislation, and misappropriation of funds. Feedback is given to the public about this type of audit which is done. Interestingly, it was reported that there was an increase of 28 whistleblowers during the 2020-2021 financial year, compared to only 6 for the previous year. This reinforces the point that once citizens' involvement is treated with due attention, we will have a more democratic society. For the 2021 results, there was an 11-mark increase for public participation. This results in an 18 out of 100 score, which means Jamaica is performing above the global average. Let's see how we can further improve. We can allow any member of the public or any CSO to testify on the budget proposal before its approval. We can develop a channel for citizens to share contribution and questions on the budget during Parliament, and this can be done in-person debate through dedicated web portal or even through social media. The final component is oversight, and the two institutions responsible are the Parliament and the Auditor General's Department. Part of the role of the Parliament and the Auditor General Department is to strengthen the integrity of the budget process and provide oversight during the approval, implementation, and auditing stage. Consistent with best practices, Parliament reviews the audit report. It is advised to be reviewed every 3 months and publish the Parliament's review. In Jamaica, however, it is done every 6 months and no review is published. Another pillar of good oversight is having the independence of the Auditor General from the executive. It not only allows for the Auditor General to work freely without threats of repercussion, but this allows for the independence and full discretion, and it is aligned with key national and international frameworks. Adding to these best practices that were already stated, Jamaica has recently established its own fiscal commission legislation through the Independent Fiscal Commission Act 2020. The Commission's objectives are to strengthen Jamaica's fiscal responsibility framework and to promote sound fiscal policy and fiscal management. Through this body, the government seeks to enhance accountability, deepen transparency, and strengthen the credibility of the government's policy and fiscal path. Jamaica is joining more than 40 other countries in the world that have established similar independent fiscal institutions. We conclude that Jamaica has good oversight, but here are some recommendations to make it even better. The legislature should debate budget policies before the executive budget proposal is tabled and approved. Legislative committees should examine executive budget proposal and publish reports with their analysis and make this available online. In doing this, we will continue on the path to budgetary openness and meet the OECD's average. To close, I leave you with this quote from Patrick Henry. "The liberties of a people will never be secure when the transaction of their ruler may be concealed from them."
Thank you, Shanaki, and that's a really good closing thought to tell us about the importance of people really having sight of what their government is doing, what they're doing with the revenue that they are taking from the people and spending on their behalf. Our panel discussion is going to include our lead researcher on this project and the presenter, Shanaki Chisholm. And we're also joined by Mr. Simon Johnson, who is known, I would say, as a financial institution innovator, but I'm referring principally to him as the founder of Stocks on the Rocks. Stocks on the Rocks is an informal gathering to discuss finance and investing that takes place on the Palisades Strip in the open air, informally, on the, the last Friday?
Last Friday of each month.
Last Friday of every month. And I have been to it. It's a really interesting discussion in a bucolic setting. I would like to encourage all viewers to go to slido.com, put in the event code CAPRI. That's going to allow you to post questions to our panelists and raise issues relative to budget openness and transparency, and also to to vote on whether questions posted by others are questions you want to hear answered. And we can use that to prioritize which questions we put to the panelists. So please do that now. I want to start with you, Simon. When you go to slido.com, we have put a poll question. The question is, how much do you know about the government's budgetary process? I want to start off by getting your opinions, your feedback on that. So answer that question, and we'll show you the results of that from time to time. I think it's fair to say, Simon, that we have a long history of a default to secrecy in our public administration. This may have been a legacy from the colonial administration. It certainly was not helped by the relationship with the IMF during many years of the early history with the IMF, when the government tried to sort of look like it was meeting the conditionalities. But there is this sense of what government does should be kept a secret. And it seems to me that this notion of open budgeting and transparency and oversight is really anathema to how we have done budgeting in Jamaica. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that's true. Actually had those 2 points in my head as well. So when we speak about the tradition of secrecy, I started to think, how far does this actually go back? How involved has the population been in the budgeting process traditionally? And if we were to think about our colonial days, there was no need for the public to be involved in the budgeting process, because the ideation around the budget, the structure of the budget, and who it was presented to is almost very similar to what we have almost 100 years after now, right? Outside of what has recently been done with the citizens' budget, and Shauna will talk a bit more about that. I think they're linked to that. We have to think about how much value did the creators of the process, or those that lead the process, think that the average citizen can add to that process. So as the average Jamaican, why should I be listening to, probably not you, Dr. King, but why should I be listening to the average Jamaican and how many billions to spend in which ministry? How can they actually add value to this process? And what this type of research has shown since the first report in 2019, and definitely now, is that certainly the average citizen and their participation in the budget process actually does add some form of value.
Shanake, the same exercise was conducted by CAPRI for the first time 2 years ago. And what we have seen from your presentation is that the government has actually improved in its, in terms of our analysis. Just summarize, what are the biggest differences between 2 years ago and now?
Well, the biggest differences would include the obvious fact that we are now performing above the global average, and 2 years ago we were performing below the global average. Our key budget documents are now being published in a timely frame, and it is more comprehensive than 2 years ago, so more things are being included in our budget. In addition to that, our participation mechanisms are having a sense of consistency. So not only is the government having the citizens' participation there, but they are making it a consistent process. So that definitely adds to our scoring in this year.
When we look at the three elements of analysis, participation, transparency, and oversight, what strikes you out of those three is that the score for public participation globally is way below transparency and oversight. And I'm just wondering, just looking at the global average now, Simon, why is public participation such a problem? Why is the score so low?
I think think for this, so when I was thinking about, you know, why this participation might be relatively so low, I'm happy. Firstly, I'm happy that this study has shown that this is not unique to Jamaica. It is something that is in more developed economies, more resourced economies than ours. And I think the notion of high public participation is linked to a high amount of accountability. And the nature of government, certainly not just ours and not just our public servants, is that they say they want a certain amount of accountability. However, they do not necessarily always have the incentive to hold themselves accountable. And as such, the participation overall, or the incentive to create systems that may induce higher public participation, is lower. There's one more thing though, and I was looking at some data, but anecdotally, we should also be looking at how involved does our population want to be in public processes like this. So if you think about our voter turnout from 2020, I believe, that's about 37–38%. It may indicate, so if you do a margin of error for those that could not make it on that day, they were working, they felt tired, they didn't know how to make a choice, that is still extremely low. Matter of fact, the global average for that is in and around 50%. So when we look at, so if we were to contextualize that in how do publics themselves want to be a part of public processes, then we'd see that it probably may also be on their side. But that may also be linked, it may be a circular thing, to what you asked before about the tradition of low engagement or open budgeting amongst governments.
That's actually a critical element, which, you know, we sort of look at low public participation as we have been discussing it in the report and amongst ourselves. And our default is, well, you know, the government is not allowing participation. But this is a critical issue. Do people really care? Do people really want to participate? And I think the comparison to the voter turnout, which is a moderately straightforward exercise, you know, you just get to pick a side kind of thing, versus, you know, having to overcome the hurdle of, do I understand what's going on? Am I going to have to make an effort to understand what is going on? And so the problem really might be people are not interested in participating. And so what can you really do about that? And I think this is a great opportunity for us to give a big up to the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal. They had a webinar this week, a few days ago, and I strongly encourage people to go on the JAMP YouTube channel, the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal, and have a look at that webinar. Because in that discussion, which included the Minister of Finance, they were able to bring out a lot of ways in which government could actually facilitate people's participation. Now, I know you watched that, Chanaki. You know, what were some of the ideas that they were throwing up?
Well, ideas were thrown from local level and also national level, because when we're talking about public participation, there are two different perspectives that we can look from. And from what they have presented from the local level, the idea was to put in place policies where MP should engage the constituents in how the funds is being used. So right now in Jamaica, we don't have any formalized mechanisms for public participation at the local level. However, at the discretion of the MPs, they can incorporate what the citizens want. How do we incorporate, how do we make the money work for you? And as such, I think an MP in Clarendon, he creates a town hall and allows citizens to say, this is the project that we want to work on. We want the roads to be fixed, we want better water supplies, and so on. But before all of that came in, one of the major points that I saw coming out was the education campaign, right? Meaning that having education town halls to sensitize citizens on what is in the budget and how the budget serves them was really a key point, and I do support that 100%. Now, going to the national level, there was conversation about using social media to engage the nation on how the budget is being used. For example, before the budget is formulated, the government can pose topical questions to the citizens to get their feedback on how they can address issues such as crime or gender issue, violence, and put specific proposals out there, meaning that use guidelines to say we need a budget breakdown, we need to see how the impact will come across and how it will benefit the citizens. Because the truth of the matter is, we do have institutions here in Jamaica that focuses on specific issues, and we too can add in making the budget work to address these specific issues.
Please go to slido.com and put in the event code CAPRI, and you can pose questions to our panelists. There's a question that has just come in on Slido, and the question is, what percentage of the budget is spent on agriculture or parochial roads when compared to the city and main roads? Now, what I want to do with that question is not ask for an answer, but to ask you, Simon, is that kind of information available on any portal, on any website?
Well,
in the form in which it is asked here, not is there the information buried in some PDF that you can put into a spreadsheet for yourself and do the calculation? Is an answer to a simple question like this on a government website?
Short answer is no. I remember a few years ago when we were doing the friendly budget, and my as an economist myself, and having received the task of doing something just like that, however, doing it for all industries and looking at the economic sections, functional classification, as it's called, the first thing that I realized that I had to do was look through the about 1,000 pages for the budget document. Now, this is a tedious process because it's not numbered, it's not chronological, it's not alphabetical. If you miss something, you have to find that back by a Control F. I went through that entire document and then found that there is a functional classification that is created internally that breaks it down by economic agent. So this is what we spend on economics or public transport. This is what we spend on defense. But that is in a PIOJ report somewhere that is not pub. Matter of fact, that report is not free, and that is on somebody's desk. And it was when we started to do that it was made in a more public format through CAPRI.
So we know, Shanake, that around the time that we did our first Following the Money report, the government basically took up the mantle that CAPRI started in publishing a friendly budget, which is a document that presents a budget in a more accessible way. The government started doing that 2 years ago. Right. Well, around the time of the report we did 2 years ago. So if we are trying to encourage public participation, and that document, presents fiscal information in an easily understandable way, is that the kind of information then to facilitate public participation that should be a website where that information is always accessible and you get these kind of simple and straightforward percentages? Would that encourage participation?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's the kind of thing we can add to our list of recommendations.
Right.
Okay, once again, slido.com, the event code is CAPRI. Amongst the results that were presented, we saw a big improvement in public participation, albeit from a low base last time.
Of 7.
So Jamaica more than doubled its score.
Yes.
What accounts for the improvement in public participation?
Well, our score improved from 7 to around 18. And based on the assessment, what really accounted for that improvement is the AGD's mechanisms that were in place for public participation. So for example, they had focus groups. Now, this was not open to the public in the sense that anyone could come. But what they did instead was to send invites to specific group based on the audit that they're interested in doing, so that those groups can give their inputs and see how the audit can be done in a more effective way. Separate and apart from that, the AGD actually has a website where they list all their audits, and you can see the status, and you can also add feedback. So me, Shauna, as a regular citizen, can go on that website and add a feedback or add a comment or say something that I think is really specific to that audit. As a matter of fact, Dr. King, when they had assessed that website and the level of input that citizens gave, it was revealed that it increased from 6 to 34 in the space of a year. And I found that very impressive. So that's also attributed to the increase in public participation. And of course, we have our investment map platform, which allows citizens to give their feedback on government projects.
Well, since you mentioned the investment map, which is also a recent innovation, just talk a bit more about it. Explain.
Well, the investment map platform was launched in 2020. And what it is an online mechanism that allows citizens to track the government projects, right? So on that platform, you will see the project that is being carried out in each parish. You would see the contractor, you would see the financial budget, and you will also see the status of that project. Now, citizens are able to leave a comment or give a feedback in which the administrator will then take into consideration. Since the last conversation with the administrator of the investment map platform, there hasn't been an update to the platform, but there are plans in place to improve it and make it in policy that it has to be updated on a regular basis.
You know, one of the great things about having a platform where the audience can participate is that you get the kind of impertinent question that the polite moderator would never think of to ask. Simon or Shane wants to know, CAPRI cares about participation and the International Budget Partnership cares about participation. Does the government care what citizens think? Do they really want to know?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Luckily, I'm not in the government, but I suppose that I wouldn't say the government as a whole doesn't care, but I do think that there are participants in the government that do care and do want that type of engagement with the public. But I think the culture of secrecy that we spoke about, the culture of closed budgeting, is what they grew up in, is what their career was started in. And as such, it's something that we, CAPRI, myself, SOTR, and all of us have to inch at taking away into the future.
Can I just add to that, Dr. King? Recently, I had a conversation with a government representative, not from Jamaica, regarding that same importance of citizens' input. And I was surprised that the response was that, they're the experts and they know what the citizens want, and the suggestions of the citizens may not be feasible. And I was so shocked because at the end of the day, they're serving us and we know what we want actually,
So it's something that we need to demand.
Right.
But, politics is the art of balancing the contradictory and conflicting demands of the population. Facilitating more public participation, I mean, there's a chance, I guess, that that's just going to put, more noise into the space and more cooks into the broth.
You see, Shana actually mentioned something that I wanted to point out as well. There is actually already a macro system or a broader system for citizens to participate. A few years ago, I found out that members of parliament really shouldn't be doing what they're doing and kind of do a little less of what they should be doing. Members of parliament are representatives of us. They should be the ones that are taking the voices from Standpipe, from Waterhouse, from the various communities and what they want and feeding that into the parliamentary process. The issue, and I guess it's a mixture of objectives, is that they're doing a lot of what the councillors should be doing. The councillors are the one that should be building, and they do, building roads and building bridges and taking pictures with building bridges. And as such, so I would implore MPs to do more of that. But there are members of parliament that are creating, I would say, microsystems within their constituencies, such as the town halls that you mentioned, to ensure that they get the feedback from the community on what should be done and what you mentioned, Dr. King, about the education of those in the community to kind of show them why you should be at this town hall, why what you say today may impact the school down the road being built next year or the year after. So I think the process of transparency and open budgeting doesn't mean that all 3 million citizens in Jamaica get a voice and we upvote and downvote and then there is no decision that is made. But it ensures that the government is more responsive to the actual needs of the people. The governments don't take a bus. The government officials don't take bus, so they don't know what's happening in the public transport system. They depend on being informed on that. So that's just an example of that.
Okay, so in addition to being able to pose questions on slido.com, we have a poll question up that we have asked you to opine on. I don't know if we have any results from that poll question yet. The question was, how much do you know about the budgetary process, the government's budgetary process? So, okay, there are the results. How much do you know? Nothing at all. The vast majority know nothing at all, and a smaller, slightly less than a majority have a moderate amount of knowledge. So that's a pretty damning result, I would say, and really makes the case.
I think.
Yeah.
I think apart, so through Stocks on the Rocks, I've had the ability to speak to hundreds of average Jamaicans, right? And I've realized that as it pertains to this process, one, there are some people that don't care or don't know why they should care, and a lot of Jamaicans don't see the monies that are being spent and budgeted as theirs. They see it as and people will say that's the government's money, what the government to do with that, but it's not. So we've not developed a culture where people see the taxes that they pay and actually link that mentally to work that should be or is being done on the ground.
Okay, there's a new Slido poll question up, so I encourage you to go back to the polls section of slido.com. Slido.com, put in the event code CAPRI, and you will see the poll question, and you can continue to post your questions on the platform. Okay, we've spent an extraordinary amount of time on the issue of public participation, which is where the Jamaican government, and it turns out most other governments in the world, perform badly. But perhaps taking a contrary position to this discussion on the importance of public participation. At first sight, when I looked at the three elements, transparency, participation, and oversight, the one that automatically struck me as the most important is transparency. And I guess I would have argued before being exposed to discussion on the importance of participation, I would have argued that transparency is the most important of the three pillars. And encouragingly, Jamaica has improved tremendously on transparency as well over the last 2 years. I mean, isn't it all about transparency, Simon?
Yes, yes. I think certainly I would probably put transparency as probably more than just a pillar, but the foundation on which the other two are built. I can't see how oversight and participation is done without being transparent in that process. Because as we've realized, Shauna would have seen it in her research, you would have seen it in your research as well, is that we can always create performative systems that seem to feed the objective without actually being transparent in those systems. So you can have oversight without transparency and participation systems without transparency. So certainly, I think that's important.
So I pointed out that, and you in your presentation showed us that we've improved in transparency. What accounts for the improvement in transparency?
Well, the main factor was our improvement in our enacted budget, which is also our Appropriations Act. So that's the only legislative law that really changes yearly, right? And this time around, it was made available in a more timely manner and also more comprehensive. So we got a greater detail as to how the money is going to be spent, right? And what is to be passed in law.
So, Slido, you've mentioned, Simon, that a part of the problem we have is not really the government's reluctance. It is the people's lack of interest. And Slido is asking, at what point should we start teaching citizens, teaching the youth about the importance of engaging in public fiscal matters?
I can
Kindergarten.
I can talk about this for weeks. I mean, it's actually it fits into what Stocks on the Rocks does.
True.
It is something that can be taught as early as possible. We don't have to be teaching 3-year-olds about the details of budgeting and how much money went to agriculture, but we can expose them to concepts around money management that feed into overall fiscal management. So it's a broader part of what Stocks on the Rocks does, which is, I would say, financial literacy, but overall financial wellness, and ensuring that we fill the gap between having these types of conversations more openly, as you mentioned, on Palisados, where it's free and open for everybody to join, and ensuring that, and this is one of our top objectives, and I'm putting the Minister of Education on notice, that we want to see this financial literacy being, and this would be a part of that, being taught in schools from as early as possible. And that can be from the kindergarten stage, around simple concepts such as delayed gratification. That's something that you can teach a baby.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about the way you put that is that financial literacy is actually a life skill. It's just that you can apply it to understanding government fiscal matters.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And I think here is where we would see the cultural shift that we would want as it relates to participate in budgetary activities. So I do agree with him, Dr. King.
And I mean, just to use a sledgehammer to bring home the point further, one of the problems, I think, Simon, you would argue, is that the hurdle to financial understanding seems greater than it really is. So it's just a matter of exposing people so they can realize that.
Absolutely. We have a grassroots initiative. So outside of Palisados, we understand that not everybody can travel to Palisados. So what our first grassroots initiative was actually in Port Antonio, Portland. But we did one in Tivoli. And my expectation going into Tivoli was for a few people to come out, and the entire community came out. And the level of discussion that we had with the entire community was much higher than what I expected. They already knew about investments. Matter of fact, they already knew about stocks. They came with specific questions about money management and what to do in different scenarios. So the hurdle is not as high as we think. And if 3 or less people can do this with Stocks on the Rocks that have 9-to-5s with almost no budget, then imagine what our agencies that currently get appropriations of billions of dollars can do for a population.
Okay, Slido. how are the details of the budget currently made available to the public, and how can they access it? So, I mean, both of you.
So, all right, you can go.
All right. So we have budgetary documents online, but for the full comprehensiveness, they're actually in some huge books that can be accessed either from the ministry. You can go ahead and request it there, and I think some public libraries have it as well. But what the government did, as what Dr. King was talking about earlier, is create a citizen's budget for us. And what that is, it is a simpler form of the budget to say, this is the amount of revenue we expect to generate for this fiscal year, this is our expenditure estimates, and this is what we plan to do with the money. Now, this is not in detail, but it is so simple that any citizen can really understand it.
Yeah. So the citizens' budget is a good start for the layman's, and it's published. I believe it's published in the papers now, so it comes as a kind of booklet in the papers. If you want more details, the Ministry of Finance website has access to the fiscal policy paper, the minister's opening budget speech, which tends to give the scope and direction in which they're going, and interim FPP, etc., and all of that. So the Ministry of Finance website will have all of that information. And Stocks on the Rocks does a summary sometimes as well, so you can check out our socials.
Okay, once again, on slido.com, there's a poll. You can help us with this process now, because the poll question is, how can citizens be enabled to participate more in the budget process? So you can give us your ideas. Here are some responses already. So you can take that into account. Make it easier. Make it easier to understand. You know, get rid of the jargon. Shana K, you have just returned from Tbilisi in Eastern Europe, where you attended a workshop with many of our country partners in this exercise of looking at the open budget landscape. Just tell us what you learned from that experience that you think is relevant to how Jamaica can improve its openness.
So yes, I went to Tbilisi a couple weeks ago, and it was really a space to share what is existing in different countries and what are the different weaknesses each country face and how we can really address it. So each country had their individual strengths and their weaknesses, and it was definitely a learning opportunity for all, Dr. King. So the example or the country that really stood out for me, and I see where Jamaican can definitely apply, is Georgia, where they had a transparency score of...
Which is the country that you were in.
Yes, Georgia, that was the host. And they had a transparency score of 87. Now, transparency score
compared
is...
to our...
18, right?
No, transparency.
Right. Yes,
So-
transparency
So our transparency
was-
in this year, well, in the present analysis,
was 50.
was 50.
And Georgia's
Georgia.
is 87.
87, okay.
And I was impressed, Dr. King. So after speaking with the minister that was there and other representatives, I understood that what they did was to ensure that all their documents was published in a timely manner. And not only that, it was fully comprehensive. And when I say comprehensive, I am talking about the different classifications, who spent the money, what was it spent on, right? What was the purpose of that money? And I saw where it was also available to the citizens. So free of access, meaning that they didn't have to pay for it, and it was easily accessible online on their Ministry of Finance website. So that was the major takeaway, and I do think that's something that Jamaica can definitely adapt.
Okay. So let's talk a bit now about oversight, which is the last of the three elements. Based on what you have discussed in this discussion right here, the Auditor General's Department is doing an outstanding job, not only in the quality of the audits, but also in facilitating some amount of public participation in the process. What are the practices outside of the AGD now that Jamaica can use to improve its score on oversight? Because that was the only one of the three elements in which Jamaica has not improved over the last 2 years.
Well, an analysis can be published for the public, right? Made available online and broken down into layman terms to understand what this audit is saying. In assessing this particular institution, this is what we found, and make it very, very simple. In addition to that, the Oversight Committee could actually involve the citizens more. We recently established our IFI, which is our independent fiscal institution, which is an excellent segue into openness. And what this really...
Fiscal Commission.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what this really shows is that Jamaica is moving towards a more open and transparent budget process. This commission now, Dr. King, will allow citizens to see clearly how the budget is going to be used and ensure that the fiscal responsiveness of the government is timely, and make sure that our fiscal resources are managed properly.
Somebody on Slido wants to know, what is the take-up by the Ministry of Finance, the Minister or the Financial Secretary, or any technocrat at the Ministry of Finance of our report? Do they read it? And do we know if they're interested in any of the recommendations? Well, we are quite certain they read it. Because when we did our first report, we got some strong feedback on it. And we also know that the Minister of Finance is genuinely interested in these matters. So we're quite sure he reads it, and any positive suggestions therein are going to be taken into account.
Can I just interject right here, Dr. King? When I was in Georgia, that was one of the highlights for Jamaica, that our minister, I should say, actually engages with the citizens, and they applaud Jamaica. They put us on a pedestal to say, listen, this is what public participation is. This is what public engagement is. This is what the ministry should be doing, serving citizens and engaging them in processes. That was an impressive move.
And I also said Dr. Clark actually came to Stocks on the Rocks already to have a discussion about something relatively similar, but as it pertains to investments. So it's true.
And the truth is that the reason why CAPRI was invited to Tbilisi and not all of the 120 countries were is really partially to do with the progress that Jamaica has made.
Right.
Of course, it's partly to do with CAPRI's efforts in this regard as well. Okay, we're getting close to wrap up. I don't know if there are any final thoughts for us from you, Simon, that, coming out of this discussion, what you really want people to take away.
Yeah, I think just to sum up everything, the institution of finance itself is built on trust and integrity. And that doesn't change whether it's a private company or the public/government. And as such, a part of that trust and building trust in those that you report to, the monies that you manage, is ensuring that they have some part in the participation and coming out of that oversight process, that there is actually action on what is being reported. So that's what I'd like to leave, since we know that the ministry watches this.
Shanake.
Yes. So Jamaica, we are on a path for good or more open transparency in the budget process. And we should continue, because we are continuously improving. And the areas that I would like to see improve specifically is public participation and transparency. Create avenues for citizens to interject or make suggestions for the use of the budget, and also publish our documents online in a timely fashion so that we can be more informed and see exactly where our money goes and how it is being used.
Thank you. Shanna K. Chisholm, lead researcher on fiscal openness at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, CAPRI. Simon Johnson, founder and leading man at Stocks on the Rocks every last Friday out at Palisados by the Rocks. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. I would like to ask you to go back to Slido one more time and answer a poll question on how you feel about this event. Those are you're seeing the responses to our last poll question, and we'd like you to rate the event this evening. I'm going to ask CAPRI's Director of Strategy, Yentle Williams, to close us out. Yen?
Thank you for that rich discussion. The information provided in this report was insightful, informative, and instructive as to how the transparency, public participation, and oversight can be improved. Of course, the full report is available on our website, capricaribbean.org, and we strongly encourage you to read it in depth and share with others who are interested in the topic. Please follow, like, and share our posts on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. This report and all our previous reports are available via our website. We look forward to continued engagement with you on this topic and other topics on the CAPRI agenda, such as our next report, the second in the European Union funded series on the care economy, which will be launched in early 2023. I would like to extend the warmest thanks on behalf of the CAPRI family to our presenters and you, our audience. Your continued viewership, participation, and engagement motivates us to continue doing our very best work. Thank you, and see you next time.